So I want to sound like a new cult member. But again, I'm just really excited because my results have been astounding. And I want to share that with others. Like my relationship with food and the impact I've had has been so impactful. I really don't see myself going back. It's just been so significant. But I would get this tension headache that went down into my forehead that I attributed through tight muscles and what have you going up over the top of your head. I'd say once a week and maybe every twice a week. It would be so bad that I'd feel like I had to take a little ibuprofen. To some level, it's gone. My mental clarity has not been better. My cognitive function has not been better.
Okay, thank you for being here, everybody. We've got Dana with us today. I think we're going to be talking about some gut stuff, if I'm not mistaken. But Dana, welcome. Thanks for doing this. Where are you located, man?
I am in Danville, California.
Danville, California. Okay, I'm not familiar with where that is. I used to.
So that's east of Oakland, up over the hills.
Okay, very good. Okay.
So kind of the greater San Francisco Bay Area, if you will, East Bay.
Okay,
yeah.
Nice. Okay. I think I've seen a sign for it. I used to go up to Vallejo and somewhere in those areas. I remember seeing it somewhere in there.
For sure.
For those that aren't familiar with you, tell us a little bit about what you do. It says FDNP, Inside Health and Fitness, so I'm sure there's something new to that. What does FDNP stand for? I'm not even sure what those acronyms are standing for.
So that stands for Functional Diagnostic Nutrition Practitioner.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it seems that much of your focus has been on gut health. Is that correct?
It was at one time. Right now, my current program really focuses, it's called Belly Fat Reset, and it focuses on insulin and insulin resistance. That's really, in terms of people's health right now, I think that's the low-hanging fruit.
There's a lot of people out there that would benefit from that, very clearly. Let's just get started. How did you get into this stuff? What drove you there? What was your background before this?
So I've been working in the health and fitness space for about 12 years, and I became an FDN practitioner about 7 years ago. And what drove me to that was really their training and their focus on functional labs. I was also a part owner in a small personal training gym, so I have some certifications along those lines as well. And personal training certainly helped my clients move and feel better, but most still experience negative health issues. That really drove me towards FDN. And I dove in subsequent training and learning. And my prior life, corporate business, I was really trained and worked in an environment that emphasized root cause and prevention. And anything other than root cause approach, and you're just tampering with the system, chasing problems rather than solutions. So in terms of health, that would fall under the approach of treating symptoms without getting at root cause. And that's where the functional lab work really, really helps and has helped. It's interesting, though, Dr. Baker, by the way, thanks for having me on. Doing labs and going over those interpretations with people, I haven't really found that to be typically a big motivator. But what they do want, they want to get fit. And that's driven primarily by aesthetics and losing weight. And that's where I meet people now. My current work focuses on, as I said, on insulin resistance. I'm a big fan of Benjamin Bickman. In fact, his work is one of the drivers that led me to try the carnivore diet. So over the years, I've done some pretty comprehensive work. And as you mentioned, maybe some of your people did some background, stress hormones, gut work, the microbiome, really metabolic markers. And I've done a lot of comprehensive work, clinical work to help people resolve complaints, lessen them, blood pressure, headaches, fatigues, etc. But that said, my personal results with the carnivore diet has blown me away. I've offered a lot of metabolic services and past over the years, probably confusing a lot of my family members in terms of my work and what I do. But really, the dots have been all connected. I really look at it more as metabolic function or dysfunctions, and that's really what drove me to the carnivore diet. And certainly your work, as well as that of others, has been phenomenal in this regard. I actually did what I would call a 4-month clinical assessment of the carnivore diet, and really my motivation was kind of 50-50. I wanted to really look at it as a way to potentially work with clients. And then I had my own issues that have been pretty significant. I have a history of autoimmune issues, particularly psoriasis and psoriatic arthritis. A young baby boomer, I'll emphasize young, And grown up with that onslaught of processed food, low fat, carb heavy eating. But for 15 years, I've been taking a biological anti-inflammatory drug. And the long-term side effects are not attractive. And that's really significant. So I've been seeing a rheumatologist, taking this power on it. And what's amazing is that, and I was feeling results with the carnivore diet really before even 3 months, but I've been able to wean off this medication. This is an autoimmune issue that I've had for years. I really wanted to go into my assessment. I did some before lab works and I actually rated some complaints. We could talk about that if you wanted to. But so I want to sound like a new cult member. But again, I'm just really excited because my results have been astounding. And I want to share that with others.
Yeah. First of all, I'm glad that it's worked for you. That's wonderful. And I believe it or not, I hear it all the time. And it never gets old, to be honest. I can't. Psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, a whole host of autoimmune disease. A lot of people end up having good success with that. And I do, the point you mentioned earlier about you as a functional physician, functional whatever, health practitioner, often you have 100 labs, 150 labs to go through. And you're like, this is out of whack. This is a little, you can optimize your labs. And I would suspect that sometimes it probably works, but many times you can impact the lab one way or another with a supplement or a dietary shift. But often it doesn't always result in anything significantly clinical. And I think it's like you mentioned, people want to feel good. And as you mentioned, when you look good, you tend to feel better. And I know there's people out there saying there's fit people that drop dead of heart attacks. But the truth of that, the reality of that is those people are by far a rarity. Most of the people dropping dead of heart attacks are the people you think are going to have heart attacks. Big old bellies, sedentary, not very active. And the people that are active and fit and lean generally, and there are exceptions, but generally are doing much better. So yeah, I mean, I'd be certainly interested to see if you've dug into some of the nuance of how you personally responded to the diet. Humira or something like that. I'm just wondering what biological. Embro. Okay, yeah, Embro. That was one of the earlier ones that people are on. And, those things. And today there's second, third, fourth generation ones, and they're getting very expensive. You're talking $5,000, $8,000 infusions done every month or two. That adds up. And as you mentioned, there are side effects. You've got a suppressed immune system. You're more vulnerable to infections, cancer. There's side effects. And yet that is considered the gold standard right now in rheumatology. What do I do with somebody's arthritis? Well, get them on a biologic. That's the most powerful weapon we have. But it's, as you probably found out, it's not. There's something that works better.
Absolutely. I agree with everything you're saying, and the expense is definitely there. What's interesting is, so this is a self-injection once a week, is just looking at diet. So on a really clean diet, let's say call it more paleo if you want to put a label on it, I was able to extend it out to about 3 weeks. Okay. But even then, my symptoms were still there. Okay. And what's interesting is during the pandemic, I'm trying to be a real positive role model for my clients. But I got re-addicted to processed foods, carbs, and sugar. And I went down hard physically and mentally. And that was also one of my motivations after obviously seeing you and many others sharing. And really what's really having a big impact on me is exactly why you're doing this, is how many positive, I'll call them clinical outcomes there are. And these aren't just people that are getting on TikTok these are people that are being interviewed by you and many others that brings, I would say, a significant amount of legitimacy to it. And so certainly got my attention after reading, studying, and what have you. So for me, again, that was one of the reasons that I wanted to do this 4-month assessment. And like my insulin went from 9.3 to 6.2. And I think probably most of your listeners know what insulin's about, controlling glucose. But my C-reactive protein, which was an systemic inflammatory marker, went from 1.38, which isn't super high, to 0.81. Okay. And then my cholesterol all went into balance. My LDL went from 136 to 155, which for me now, the way I look at it, I think that all my cholesterol in balance is a sign of vitality. And my ALT was high at 35 and went down to 26. And I think that one of the big things that I would want to emphasize too is that, yeah, I lost over 30 pounds and my waist probably it's pushing maybe even 3 to 4 inches right now in terms of reduction. But in terms of health, okay, it's that visceral fat that I lost and that I'm still losing. And as the implications of visceral fat is significant. It'll adjust your hormones and convert your testosterone into estrogen and just all kinds of nasty things. So those markers to me, and my blood pressure went from not super high, it's 123 over 80. It's quite frankly, if I hadn't done it for myself, I might not quite believe it all, even if you were interviewing somebody.
Yeah, to be honest, the only reason I'm an advocate of this is because I did it myself, and I saw the results on myself. And I think most physicians that are, and there are a number of physicians now, quite a few in fact, that are becoming advocates of this is because they do it on themselves and they get some kind of unexpected, often amazing result, and then they become like very interested in this. And I think because you're talking about you lost 30 pounds, your blood pressure normalized, your inflammatory markers basically normalize. And for somebody with a chronic inflammatory autoimmune disease like psoriatic arthritis, it's probably unusual to have low inflammatory markers, particularly off. I don't know if those labs are on or off medications, but irrespective, they went down, which is a good sign.
They were actually off, which is an excellent point. I had stopped taking it, maybe just with some anticipation. I think it just timed out that way. It wasn't necessarily intentional, but it did happen. But yeah, you're right. And typically when people have autoimmune issues, like even with my clients, and especially younger people, our immune system, it's very complex. I'm certainly not an expert, but it's a strength weakness thing. One of its strengths is just its memory, right? You get a molecule. Yeah. Based on my gut work that I did on myself and based on a lot of people, looking at zonulin, I probably had intestinal permeability, leaky gut. I think that way back when that probably contributed to my autoimmune. I'd probably put some money on that. But the autoimmune issue for people, I believe, is on the rise. I don't know the statistics on it, but you don't want that, okay? It'll rear its head in so many different ways. And in fact, I think my thyroid was starting to be implicated a little bit. I had done some labs on that, checking it out. I don't have those numbers in front of me, but I did see a change for the positive in terms of the normalization of TSH and thyroid hormone.
Yeah, absolutely. When you have one autoimmune disease, you're very prone to get another autoimmune disease, which points to a common root cause etiology, which I think, as you point to, is probably gut integrity. And you mentioned zonulin. For those who don't know, the zonulin is when we have the tight junctions. That's one of the proteins that's involved in that. When they break down, you have elevated zonulin levels, which would indicate increased permeability. So the other thing, so you were checking. You said you did a 4-month assessment. What were you assessing? What were all the things that went into that assessment?
So I did all the blood markers that I really went over. Blood markers. So the only ones I didn't comment, like one of the significant ones is I'm a big fan of Benjamin Bickman and my triglycerides to HDL ratio, which is his inexpensive tool to look at potentially insulin resistance. Mine wasn't super high. 1.61, it's 1.09. I think Bickman is looking for, if you average it out, less than 1.8. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you're over 2, there could be leading into insulin resistance. My HDL went from 62 to 77. My triglycerides dropped. This is all like ditto for you, Dr. Baker. You hear this all the time now, but my triglycerides went from 100 to 84. So this, again, I references is that I'm looking, when I'm working for clients, I was looking for that ratio or that balance of cholesterol, certainly not the demonization approach. And then I looked at waist height ratio. So I'm a fan of that. It's easy for people to do versus just BMI. So mine was 0.58. It's now 0.52. I think it might even be less than that now. Again, I mentioned my waist, my weight. The other things that I did, because I wanted to do this, is really to take out the cult following aspect or the over enthusiasm. I actually rated my health complaints. So I rated psoriasis, I rated fatigue. These were symptoms or complaints I had when I started. And then body stiffness, which part of the inflammatory. So my psoriasis, my scale is a 5 is terrible and a 0 that it's gone. Okay. So 5 is terrible, 0 is gone. I went on psoriasis, I went from a 4 to 1. And that's actually maybe down to a 0 here. I already see it transitioning more in terms of my skin health. Fatigue, this is that daily mid-afternoon, went from a 4 to 1. Yeah, again, 4 being bad. Negative mood thinking went from a 4 to a 1. And my body stiffness went from a 4 to 1. Yeah, these are subjective. But again, with the work that I do and working with clients in this regard, I really try to be as objective as I can in terms of evaluating this carnivore diet assessment. So those are pretty significant. But I will tell you, you can comment on that, but I will tell you that the discoveries that I had that I weren't even on the table was probably the thing that most, it intrigues me and it surprises me and it greatly pleases me, actually.
Let me just back up and comment on some of the things you said about the subjectives. Realistically, when you go to a physician or a healthcare provider, you're there for the subjective experience. I feel awful, and it's hard to quantify that objectively. But when you said it goes from a 4 to a 1, so that is significant, at least to you it is, and to whoever the patient might be. So it's worth discussing and considering. And I wanted to ask, because you mentioned about body stiffness, because you were talking about psoriasis, and there's something called a PASI, PASI score, where the rheumatologist will rate psoriatic plaque surface areas and things like that. But the stiffness was associated with the psoriatic arthritis. Did you have, you had it, I guess, for many years. Did you have some sort of significant joint erosion? There's pathognomonic deformities we see with psoriatic arthritis, particularly in the fingers and things like that. Had you developed any of that yet, or was it still pretty well in decent shape with your joints?
Not bad. And actually that even though with the wrist, I think probably the Embro maybe even supported that a little bit over the last 15 some years. But I haven't had any imaging to do that. I maybe a little bit. Psoriatic arthritis is a little different than, let's say, as I see it, a little different than rheumatoid arthritis. So it tends to isolate on certain joints. In other words, if you were hammering something, that you might get in the wrist or the elbow or something like that. Certainly a repetitive motion. I don't remember if I had any of those scores, but it was enough at the time for me and I had actually been prescribed and treated with methotrexate, which was absolutely terrible. It made me feel terrible. It's just, as I look back with the work I do now, it's like just freaking crazy. But it was enough for me to sign a contract with the devil, so to speak. Okay, all these lymphoma, cancer side effect potentials and what have you. If I can have a better quality of life, I'll sign the Embro contract. Okay. So I don't remember specifically to answer your question, but it was definitely had an impact on my life.
Have you been back to see the prescriber, rheumatologist, whoever was prescribing the Embro since you've come off and went carnivore? Has that taken place yet, or will it take place?
Yeah, he's actually a really good guy. He's a football fan, and he's a Colt fan. I'm a Niner fan, so we talk about that stuff a little bit. But he's totally dialed into what he does from a conventional standpoint. But I have an exit, and I call it an exit interview with him. And he knew that even when I went paleo and cleaned up, he definitely wasn't trying to, let's say, strongly encourage me to stay on my weekly injections. He's like, hey, if you don't need it for 3 weeks, okay, cool. Continue on. But I do plan to do that, but we'll see how the response is. He is a really good guy. I think he will be pleased. He's not going to have time to get into the science behind it. So, yeah.
And how long has it been since you've had an injection, just out of curiosity?
So I would say it's been Actually, as I think about it now, it was probably just about not too long after I started. I can read my skin like a book. Okay. When you have been dealing with this for years, as you may know, but it's not just what you observe on the skin. There's an underlying, I would call it like a neurological activation that happens. And so you'll get into these 3-day, 4-day skin cycles. And it's super anxiety provoking because I don't even know how to describe it. It'd be like you had 1,000 mosquito bites or something in certain areas that are just starting to bother you. So it's super impactful. But now as I look at my skin, and even in the last 3 weeks, I've even seen this continued trend in terms of little spots it's just starting to clear up. So I guess I would say that I'm confident I've weaned off the medication. My psoriasis is still hanging there a little bit, but look, I've been doing this for 4 months. So I anticipate, because this is not just a clinical assessment anymore. Like, this is like my relationship with food and the impact I've had, and we'll talk about the mental clarity thing, I'm sure, in a minute here, has been so impactful. I really don't see myself going back. It's just been so significant. Yeah.
So it's fair to say this is the longest you've been off Enbrel since whatever, 15 years or whatever you've been.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not
and from your standpoint, just assessing the treatment of medication, if you were to, let's say, do a clinical evaluation of my skin when I started to where it's at now, and you correlated those two pieces of information, yeah, it's pretty astounding.
Did you ever take any pictures of before and after, just out of curiosity?
I did, but they weren't really good quality. And the problem with the Enbrel is it did keep it under control. Mm-hmm. So in other words, I used to have plaquing significantly in certain areas, not like 100% of my body. But the Enbrel did help that, obviously, with the cost. But you'd see it sprout up at the end of the week, or if I was going 3 weeks. But definitely again, as I mentioned, during the pandemic, when I really started to eat atrociously, I could see it really start to take off. So my immune response was really and inflammation was really starting to trigger.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess in retrospect, or maybe in real time, you realize that when I eat like garbage, it makes the course of this disease worse. Was that a pretty fair observation?
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Yeah. And I've observed that over the years doing the work that I do. But again, I've never been able to go longer than 3 weeks. So it's been at least probably going on 3 months now, I think, maybe.
Okay. Well, hopefully, yeah.
I should have made a note of that, but I didn't. But anyway.
Now, you'd mentioned you were surprised by a number of other things that you didn't expect or didn't. So maybe you want to touch on what those things were.
Yeah. So I called them discoveries on my little spreadsheet I'm looking at over here. I would just say ruminating thoughts, negative, that little guy on your shoulder that's telling you all these crazy things. I didn't realize how significant that had become. I tell my clients, like, the mental part, because they start feeling better, is really insidious. And people don't realize the impact that metabolic poor health is having on them. It just creeps up, right? So for me, ruminating thoughts negative, that little guy went from a 4 to a 1. And I would say right now, I would put it at a 0. It's gone. Okay. And just this constant state of uneasiness. And look, I'm 65. I do what I do in terms of helping people with their health and what have you, and been around. So I'm balancing this out with regular life, right? I have kids, grandkids and everything, and there's issues that come up. But this is more of an internal thing I'm talking about. I went to a 4 to 1, and I would say that's probably a 0 right now too. And the interesting one is, I don't know, probably over 2 years, I know when people talk about symptoms like this, it sounds like they could be imagining or what have you. But again, I've done corrective exercise with people that have musculoskeletal issues. I know, but I would get this tension headache that went down into my forehead that I attributed through tight muscles and what have you, going up over the top of your head. I would get this thing and dig in there and what have you. And So I'd say once a week and maybe every twice a week. It would be so bad that I'd feel like I had to take a little ibuprofen. So it's like once or twice a week to some level, it's gone. And what my theory on this is that it seems like to me, if you have a point of inflammation wherever, that the carnivore diet, I don't know the mechanisms, but if it's that healthy saturated fat or whatever, but I think it just dissipates. I think if you have inflammation of any sort, now it could be related to the gut a little bit. I don't need to speculate on. I'll just talk as a client or a patient. It's gone. It's gone. I've been to chiropractor for that. My mental clarity, my cognition, this is probably one of the biggest things is that, and probably I've done a fair amount of reading on ketogenesis and what have you. But my mental clarity has not been better. My cognitive function has not been better. And when I was thinking about before I got on this Zoom with you, is that means that I'm much more effective every day. And it also means you're just more happy, every day, because that's what your cognition, right? It's just like you experience these things. So I would say that's like that the mental part has been just significant.
Yeah, a lot of people will notice improved cognition, mood, general happiness, mood stability, lability is gone, those types of things. You mentioned family, kids, grandkids. How has this diet that you've done been received by the rest of the family? They think you're just off your rocker and crazy, or are they like noticing that you've lost 30 pounds and feel better? What's been the response so far?
So I've been doing this work, with functional labs, what have you, for a number of years now. And I've gone down a lot of paths. I did a lot of gut work, was talking about the microbiome and intestinal permeability and all this kind of stuff for years now. So I think in some respects, they take it with a grain of salt. They also think, oh, okay, this is Dad or Uncle Dana or whatever, just going down one of his paths. But the people that I'm really close to that see the results, and that's really everybody, super happy for me, super happy. My wife is super supportive. Like, she made a Costco run yesterday and picked up a bunch of nice meat for me and what have you. I think for me, though, it's really hard because from a personal standpoint is one, if I were going to brother-in-law's house tomorrow for dinner, I just bring my own. I'll bring my own ribeye. And usually if I go out, I'll do a really nice ribeye, a big fat one or something to celebrate. But I would say everybody's been very supportive. It's one of those things that you do have to experience it, I think. And unless you're one that's intrigued by the health and the science with everything out there, you're going to get the standard saturated fat and LDL and all that kind of stuff. But here's what I would say. And with my clinical assessment, I counted them up. When you look at my blood and my body metrics, I've crossed like 10 accepted metrics in terms of health and all-cause morbidity. I've crossed those off the list. It's absolutely astounding. And the only thing that anybody could point here is my LDL went up a little bit, which obviously I am not concerned with. I'm very comfortable with the data. In fact, I think it's the other way around, quite frankly. Maybe some out. And that I mean that I look at my LDL going from 136 to 155 and being, especially with the balance. And really for me, as I work with clients, because I do check inflammation, I'm looking at their inflammatory marker, their HSCRP. And yeah, if their inflammation is pretty significant and their cholesterol is all out of balance, that's not cool. But that's not what we're talking about here. My whole thing is that it's like a ruminating thought and how I can work with clients. And will they be receptive? Because if I take all the work, Dr. Baker, that I've done, and you alluded to this, I all the functional labs and looking at hormones and the implications of stress to hormones and the gut and the microbiome, I'm like, I call into question some of that. Did I help people? Yeah, absolutely. I did. I had some people that have been to these GI specialists and what have you, and blood pressure and, all kinds of stuff. But if I had to, as let's say a business person, right, and look at this as a solution, that's what it is. That's what it is. Now, for me, one of the reasons I did it, obviously, anybody that has autoimmune issues is probably going to have some mental health challenges, typically depression or what have you. Some anxiety typically goes hand in hand with inflammation. And then with my medication and everything, I went in grass-fed, grass-finished, salt and water. And I'm still doing that. But for me, if you have an autoimmune issue, gut issues, and or maybe mental health challenges, it's fallen into the no-brainer category for me in terms of the carnivore diet being a solution.
Let me ask you, because you'd mentioned in fact, fairly recently, I was scrolling through your Instagram and I noticed that you've got these gut things and intermittent fasting and Prolon, which is a fasting mimicking thing that Volta Longo has been pushing out there. Do you see, in retrospect, maybe a lot of half measures? So you're almost there because you're cutting out some of this stuff, but you're not quite doing enough. And so we get a limited amount of benefit with its autoimmune paleo or specific carbohydrate diet or low FODMAP diets and things like that. We're bumping up against it, but we're not quite, because we do get some results with that, but it's not quite as powerful. Do you see that in retrospect, perhaps?
Absolutely, 100%. But what's interesting is, and even when I start thinking about my A1C stayed the same, 5.4, which I didn't talk about because red blood cells and it becomes a discussion all its own. But that I know probably in a while that may go. But let's just take hemoglobin A1C as a sign of the average 3-month glucose or what have you. I don't even know if that's applicable anymore as a lab. I'm thinking like some of these this is deep. Okay, this is deep, maybe too deep but not to underestimate the audience or anything. But to your point, I'm wondering if the way even conventional medicine and people that do the work that I do, if they want to call it integrative medicine, functional medicine, whatever they want to call it, if the variability in terms of how people, their health, and particularly how they're eating, is so significant, what's the standard reference point? What are we really evaluating in terms of getting some kind of direction in terms of correcting metabolic dysfunction? Heavy, probably shouldn't have thrown it out there, but it's just because of the work, and really your question really incited that thinking and that I've had here over the past couple of weeks. Like, really, you don't even have to, for the most part. I still do lab work, the fat reset, insulin resistance, and looking at that. But if you really looked at just coaching with somebody on a personal level, a carnivore diet that best fits them, and there's some different characterizations of that. I don't know what else you need to do.
I mean, in many cases, it's that simple. And your point about, is hemoglobin A1C necessarily the best measure for metabolic health? And there's even a lot of endocrinologists that are less supportive of the hemoglobin A1C as a really true accurate measurement, because we often see conflicting CGM data. You'll have somebody wearing a CGM, and according to those numbers, the hemoglobin A1C should be 4.8, and they get their blood draw back and it's 5.6. This doesn't match up. And so the question is it extended red cell life? Is it glycemic variability that has a bigger role here? So there's a lot of things that go into that. And I agree that some of the things we measure them because we think there's the right things, but they don't correlate with actual health in our patients, or at least it's defined by the patient themselves. And you see some of these outcome measures that physicians use and as tools to assess where somebody's doing better. But when you ask the patient themselves, what matters to you? And they're like, that doesn't matter to me. I want to get out of bed and feel good. I don't care if my labs are perfect. I want to actually function and feel good. And so I think we're missing the mark a lot of times. And granted, subjective things are hard to measure, but they're not impossible. And there's certainly, you can tell, I'm better or I'm worse. I sleep better. I feel better. My mood's better. I have better libido. All those things are very something you can assess, maybe not with a perfect numerical score, but it's there. And I think you're right on that. And so when I was interviewed with Joe Rogan, he was, what about your labs? I'm like, Joe, I'm not sure which labs are going to be the most helpful here.
Yeah.
We don't even know.
Right.
I mean, we don't know. And I still find that.
Yeah.
And I find physicians today that you'll see someone's serum creatinine goes up on a high protein diet and they're automatically thinking, oh my God, kidney disease. Well, that's not what it does. It's just, no, you get a cystatin C and change it out or measure it directly. But it's a lack of education and basically a familiarity with the normal. And the normal is pretty bad. I mean, the average person is pretty sick.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had, just a quick comment, A1C, I've had completely different numbers from different labs. Pretty significant. Now, on any given day, that can change. But I think you're right. It's really good to hear you as a physician to really emphasize, I think and you do it consistently, the subjective health complaints, how one's feeling. Like every appointment I have with a client, I ask them to rate their energy. I ask them to rate their mood, and I ask them to rate their mental clarity, just roughly. And then we also look at their health complaints over a period of time. And I try to do that on a 1 to 5, try to have them do that. And I think part of the reason is that I want to know, because I think those indicate maybe a potential trend, plus or minus a couple of weeks or so. But also, I think it's important, as you said, to meet them, the patient, the client, where they're at and how they're feeling.
Yeah, it's why do people go to physicians or healthcare providers? Because they feel bad. There's every once in a while there's a person that's just doing it because it's the annual checkup, or somebody who's like ultra biohacker person and they want this or that. But for the most part, if you get people feeling good, then you become redundant. So what the hell do I need you for? I already feel good. And I think as sad as it is, the goal of healthcare should be to put healthcare out of business, honestly, or most of it. Yeah. Say for emergency services and childbirth and traumas and things like that. But gosh, we shouldn't have such a robust chronic care industry. That is just insane that we do. And we do. And it is 80% of our healthcare costs are $4 trillion a year, 80-something% of that goes to chronic disease.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling to think about that.
Yeah, it is. I think your emphasis on that consistently is a really good message.
Yeah, and I will say, not to my credit, not to be bragging, but I've been pretty consistent through the years. I pretty much said what I thought from the beginning, and I haven't changed much. I think about I wrote my book in really 2017, 2018, published in 2019, and I wouldn't change much of any of it. I think it still holds up. Let me ask you, because I assume you're at your office, or unless that's a screen, but you're still seeing patients? You said, how do I integrate this new discovery of mine into my practice? What is your plan for that? Or how do you suspect that'll be received?
That's a great question. In fact, I was just talking to a person I would call a marketing expert in terms of maybe teaming. So yeah, that's just a screen background. I meet with everybody virtually now. The Instagram is actually a little dated. I need to get on there and change it. I'm not really active except for my website. And I do have a LinkedIn page, but I'm talking to her about reaching out and doing things a little differently. I have this idea. I actually have a pretty strong background in personal training, fitness training. In fact, I think I was watching you deadlift the other day, by the way. And there's a small personal gym that I just became affiliated with. And I just really still love getting face-to-face with people. I don't think it's an age thing. I'm just an old school or anything. I just have found that my ability to get face-to-face with people and make a bigger impact and relate to them, it's just comfortable. And I feel it's more beneficial. So anyway, what I am thinking about it, so I'm not advertising it right now, is doing what I would call a semi-private training program, 12 weeks based on the carnivore diet, of a maximum of 8 participants. Okay. 35 minutes approximately, say it's a 55-minute session, would focus on very effective strength training. So I know what I'm doing there. You give me 30 minutes and I can give somebody a total body pretty effective. Maybe not you, your average person, right? Because there's a lot of opportunities there. Twice a week. What I want to do is I want to save that 15 to 20 minutes at the end, and I want to use that for community sharing of the group. And I want to bring that community and have them be able to talk through, just like you do with everybody, their questions about the carnivore diet, the challenges they may have, whatever it may be, and look at myself as just being more of a facilitator in that mode and encouraging them to help each other, because I really think and I wouldn't have said this. I am a bit of an old school guy, a bit of a train on my own. I'm training in my garage and everything. But I think for a lot of people, that community spirit could be extremely powerful. And also, I think they could get really good results, because one of the things we haven't touched on was, for me, I've changed it up a little bit, but a total body routine, resistance training, appropriate load, what have you, not crazy, for 2 weeks during this. I think one of the most significant things I haven't touched on is, I've lost weight and the waist and everything, but I've retained lean muscle. That's a big deal. That's a really big deal, especially as we age. So anyway, I think that I have some thoughts around really starting up this group training that might be centered around that. And I think coupling the strength training with the carnivore diet with the community. I don't know if anybody's really doing that yet. Maybe they are. They probably are out there. But I think it could be a pretty cool concept.
Yeah. No, community is tremendous. I spend every days a week with this group, and one in the morning, these afternoon ones are less well attended because it's not in the usual time, but absolutely can be, because they interact with each other and they can share their journey. And this can be isolating. And I don't know how it is in Danville, California. I know depending on where you are in the country, this is considered really weird, or some people aren't bothered by it. I assume you have no access, no difficulty. When I was in Southern California, there was meat everywhere. I didn't have any trouble with that. It wasn't a problem. But are you finding with it, let's talk about the functional practitioner, nutrition practitioner. Was there a big push for plant-based in that? Is there like a
No, not at all. No, there was diet. It was definitely a part of it, but a lot of it was around stress and hormones, looking at using functional labs, looking at different degrees of metabolic function or dysfunction. But to answer your question, I think, let's say the San Francisco Bay Area is probably more receptive to extremes in general.
Mm-hmm.
So from vegan to carnivore or whatever, right? But I am definitely, and it's really disturbing, to be honest with you, because people that really know what's going on with a vegan diet and it's just deficiencies. There's just no way to get around that. So unless you're really supplementing, depending on how robust one's metabolism is, eventually the outcome probably isn't going to be that great. I see that happening with the younger people, and I definitely see it as a trend in the food industry, and it involves money. And it is very disturbing to me. It's not because I don't hunt or I'm strictly looking at the carnivore diet or any other way of eating as, is it healthy for that person? Do they have the mental clarity? Do they have positive mood? Do they have energy? And do they not have disease, bad things happening, right? So I really have no ties to any one group. I'm just looking at it in terms of functionality, metabolic functionality. But I don't really feel that. I am a little, I don't want to use the word scared, but in terms of launching, whenever you do a group thing, you got to make a commitment, right? So I don't necessarily have a great way to assess how attractive this group program would be, which I'm going to call meta lean for metabolic, meta lean, in terms of being a carnivore diet approach. But hey, if I get it out there and it's not successful, I will have learned something. I could also go back, and I'm not going to leave Belly Fat Reset behind. That probably will be more of a virtual, maybe reach out a little bit in a broader network on that. Because if you can really look at insulin and get that down, insulin resistance, for a lot of people, that's going to have a very significant positive impact to their health.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure it will. And I think, like I said, I think we're at the literally, the tip of the spear on this. I think over the next few years, decade or so, this is going to be like just enormous. And I think there are going to be a lot of people. I think a lot of people are fed up with the standard of care, quite honestly, the allopathic medical system, which I grew up in and trained in, and was just, here's a pill for every solution. Every problem's got a pill. And I think in those pills come with prices, side effects, cost, basically not really treating the problem efficiently. It's important. Let me think. We've got just a few more minutes left, Dana. Is there anything else you wanted to share or discuss in the last few minutes here? Or?
No, I don't think so. In terms of training, just as a quick side note, I've been experimenting again with some isometric training, static training, followed up with some negatives. And so it's really cool at 65 to be able to do that. It's very easy to do. I think it's had some great results. Anyway, just sharing that with you because I know you train and you can get a lot done in a pretty short period of time.
Oh,
so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You don't need to spend hours a day in the gym. 15, 20 minutes for most people is adequate, provided you don't screw around and you get it done. And I do a lot of days where my workout is 10, 15 minutes and they're hard.
Yeah.
And you get results.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. No, other than that, I just would like to say that, just repeating what others have said, I think the work that you're doing is really significant. And kudos to you. I think that your message and not being fearful of your opinion on conventional medicine, because what's really pitiful to me is that how many people are still accepting of that service. So yeah, it's just, and I know it's because they don't know. They don't have the knowledge that certainly you have. Maybe somebody like me that does my work. They just don't know. But still, it's just they're okay with it. I guess when you don't know any better or you don't have a clear alternative, then you don't have that reference point. So no judgment. It's just an observation that I have when I'm talking to people.
Yeah, fair enough. Anyway, I'll tell you what, Dana, thank you so much for sharing your story and what you're up to. And like I said, I know you're relatively early on in the journey, but I suspect it'll continue to get better. I can tell you many people that go carnivore will notice their health continues to improve year after year for many years into it. Who knows where you'll be another year from now or something like that. Thank you so much. And the rest of you guys, thanks for being here. And we'll be back tomorrow morning once again. Take care. Thanks, Dana.